Hey, I'm gonna spoil more of this game. Considering you clicked on the video with the picture of the Dark Urge and a title literally saying he's the main character to this grandiose game, you probably knew that. I might have even spoiled some poor souls scrolling on their home screen, and I honestly feel a little guilty considering the unbridled rage I felt when a thumbnail spoiled the end of Attack on Titan: The Dark Urge! Let's be honest, you'd be lying if you didn't think what would happen if I just, killed this NPC at some point or another in Baldur's Gate 3. And while there's many incentives to hesitate from playing God in your adventure and saying, did this merchant just look at me funny? You could miss out on some quality quest lines and subsequent rewards should you choose to mollywop any character you find. So many players will drift towards the concept of sparing these intrusive thoughts and engaging with nearly all the content the game has to offer. But Larian Studios acknowledged how players may feel barred from having as violent of a playthrough as they would wish, and instead of pushing players away from this attitude, they embraced it. The Dark Urge is one of the many origin characters you can choose to play as in Baldur's Gate 3. And while many have an impression on what awaits them in their adventure ahead, this character choice completely turns those expectations upside down, giving them a good excuse for an evil run. Annoyed at this obnoxious pixie? Crush it! Thought this squirrel was actually a demon warlord? Well, maybe you didn't, but the Dark Urge is gonna boot it anyways. Welcome to Figuring Out Fantasy, where we'll be diving into the playthrough of Baldur's Gate 3, which breaks nearly all of the game's intended direction, and might just thrust a new main character into the situation, the Dark Urge. Right out of the gate, the game makes it clear that there is something seriously affecting the Dark Urge and giving them the instinct to reap havoc upon the world around them. This instantly establishes an internal conflict that supersedes the standard goals and objectives players had experienced as their own personalized adventurer. The beginning sequences of this game gives players an opportunity to identify just how different of a playthrough this will be compared to a more traditional one. As the Dark Urge, you're suffering from amnesia. We remember little but glimpses of our own past, and it's clear that our rancid blood whispers for us to kill, and kill again. This isn't just a typical sense of bloodlust we've seen out of fantasy before, but an urge that possesses our entire being and leaves us with no recollection of the following chaos. A unique aspect of the Dark Urge that sets them apart from the other origin characters available is that they aren't recruitable in any other playthrough, and if you desire to test the waters with their cravings, you must play as them yourself. Not long into our adventure, we'll likely run into Shadowheart, and it's an opportunity to acknowledge the possible extra options in dialogue offered within this special playthrough, leading to inquiring more about how others around you feel about your urge to kill. Some will be taken aback by it, though others like Shadowheart are a bit more understanding of your circumstances, but won't leave out their concerns of what our bloodlust could mean for them, were we not able to resist these urges. I really like what they do in the intro sequences for the Dark Urge playthrough. While we feel like the center of attention in any given adventure through the Sword Coast, it's a different sense of a spotlight. Even as Tav, a large portion of your decision making is amongst the followers you'll accumulate throughout your journey. Lae'zel, Gale, Karlach, these are all characters who have conflicts of their own which you're responsible for how they play out. This doesn't really change in a playthrough as the Dark Urge, but the perspective does shift a bit, causing the interactions with your camp to feel like the focus isn't on them, but yourself. We're still a part of the grand scheme of things in being infected with an illithid tadpole, but it begins to feel over the course of the story like that conflict takes a back seat to what truths there are to uncover surrounding our apparent sickness. Our first taste of this insatiable thirst for blood comes when we stumble across Gale reaching his hand through the ancient sigil on the mountainside, and rather than pull our favorite wizard from Waterdeep out of his predicament, we can choose to indulge in our urge for the first time, and fantasize about tearing his hand off. Jeez. But this fantasy soon becomes a reality as we recollect our thoughts and find a severed hand in a pool of blood resting on the ground, painting a picture as to what had just taken place. This is the first instance in which the consequences of your actions as the Dark Urge start to become apparent, as this will prevent Gale from ever joining your party, and it will likely clear a path for you to try and avoid further detrimental decisions like it. Or finally being able to rip off the hand that's been begging for so many magical artifacts sounds pretty good too. Maybe I won't reload that save, but you may actually want to and choose to tread carefully in the future, as there's a unique path in store for those who can resist the urge to kill. But don't worry, we'll be going over all the possible outcomes available to you as the Dark Urge, resisting it or not. Act 1 doesn't begin to flesh out for our character until we arrive at the Emerald Grove, where there will be many notable differences in terms of what directions we can take in certain dialogues. Around the first immediate corner is a cutesy little squirrel. Oh, just look at how harmless he is. Ouch, dude, that looked like it hurt. We have no control over this outcome. As soon as the narrator sets the scene with this innocent little creature, our character gets a field goal kicker's approach and doinks it off the tree Cody Parkey style. This proves just how affected by this lust for murder our character is, and honestly feels a little scary as to what other options we may not have control over in the future. Many of the interactions we can have with the inhabitants of this grove don't mean much in terms of the grand scheme of our story, but are fun to explore nonetheless. There are many comments you can make to various NPCs around the area, but when running into Kaga for the first time, we have an alternative path as to what the fate of dear Arabella will be when it comes to the snake that's eyeing her down. You identify in the tense moment that the snake is intent on striking the girl if she makes any sort of struggle, and through this realization, we can nod towards the exit, encouraging Arabella to take her opportunity to escape, but as we acknowledged, this would only spell her doom. This will eliminate the possibility of engaging with certain questlines in the future, but depending on the commitment to this evil playthrough, that might not be a concern. In communicating with some familiar characters, we can slowly recognize more and more extra options in dialogue. Whether it's killing a bird Nettie just nursed back to health, or breaking the legs of one of Auntie Ethel's potion victims, we can quickly understand just what kind of horrifying ways we'll be putting our cruelty on display. Most notably, there's a brand new opportunity to engage with concerning the bard Alfira, who's heartbroken over the loss of her dear music instructor. The only clear option here is to take her instrument and destroy it, because, duh, we're the Dark Urge. Regardless of how our dialogue with her goes though, she will arrive at our camp in an upcoming long rest, either only requesting a night's stay if the prior encounter went sour, or asking to stick around if we were decent to her. And should she spend the night at camp, we'll come to our senses before the sun rises, standing over her absolutely mangled body. This was honestly shell-shocking to me the first time I experienced it. Sure, we've done acts like booting a squirrel or ripping Gale's hand off. Okay, that one was actually pretty unsettling. But this is just such a horrific sight to see, and really cements just how dangerous we are to those around us. And speaking of the other members in our camp, we'll be forced to explain ourselves to them. We can succeed in some deception to get out of this, or we can just blame Astarion. But fail to maneuver through this dialogue and the party won't react well. And while they don't quite disown us, they sure as hell make it clear that they're keeping their distance. The more and more we indulge in this urge, the more we begin to feel detached from the characters which were likely so prominent in another playthrough of ours. Sure, we can proceed with all of their questlines as normal, but these characters are clearly not as trusting and endearing towards us as we have likely once experienced. Though we'll soon come to understand that there could be incentives to continue down this treacherous path and embrace this target you've placed on yourself. Our next long rest comes with some further context surrounding our origin, and it's presented in the package of a small, grimy-looking butler named Sceleritus Fell. This fiend establishes himself as a reservoir of information relating to just who we could have been at one point in time, but he's hesitant to tell us the full story and only gives small hints for the player to piece together themselves. It's woven throughout this conversation that he knows us very personally, telling us that we have been parted for so tragically long. He seems deeply hurt seeing us in such an amnesic state, saying how he had heard rumors of our indisposition but hoped they weren't true. And right after, we're informed about how we used to commit at least 5 villainous acts before breakfast, making it clear that what we had done to the bard Alfira may have just been a glimpse into many more gruesome deeds from our past, including... Is that a bad... Can I even say that on YouTube? It was through the stench of this particular kill in which our butler was able to track us down and reunite with their beloved master. Your initial reaction to this little freak may be a negative one, but your skeptical attitude will certainly change in understanding that he's here to bestow a reward for fulfilling our nature as the Dark Urge. The Deathstalker mantle is an extremely unique cloak that instantly empowers us to thrive in reaching our next kill, as its effect grants us invisibility upon slaying an enemy in combat. This item isn't available through any other playthrough, along with our little butler here. So the sparing nature of these elements, considering that they're only acquirable as part of the Dark Urge's journey, may steer you in the direction of getting to know your darker side a bit better if it means more gifts from Sceleritus Fell. This isn't all there is to experience in Act 1 as the Dark Urge though. Players are likely familiar with the opportunity to raid the Emerald Grove with Minthara upon reaching the Goblin encampment on our way towards the mountain pass. Before we talk about that though, let's stay in the Goblin camp for a sec to check out even more off-putting encounters with our restless urge. Within the immediate area, we'll find a goblin named Crusher, whose only prior purpose was to demonstrate the goblin hierarchy and how much authority certain individuals feel they have over others. He'll demand that we show respect by kissing his foot, and if we acquiesce, there will be a bit of a different course of events that take place than we might be used to. Instead of cowering to his authority, our urge will take over and make us take a big ol' bite out of one of his toes. Ugh, probably tasted like a blend of mud and warg shit. Anyways, this'll throw us right into combat as expected, but once we weaken Crusher a bit, it'll now be him who is forced to kiss the feet of his superior. Dark Urge experiences within the Goblin camp almost feel like a bit of a revenge tour for what these dimwits might have pulled in a previous playthrough. Though if we simply aim to take advantage of any old helpless soul like we did with poor little Pandira in the Emerald Grove, we can travel deeper into the Goblin encampment where we'll find Spike, who has an innocent adventurer bound to a torture board. And while we can maneuver our way through this dialogue as any character we like, when playing as the Dark Urge, this begins to feel like our special moment. We can select an option to take over the torturing without needing to pass any dice rolls to convince Spike. Letting him know that we're a professional makes him cede the reins to us, and what will follow is based off our choice of direction.
Stop, please! Stop this!
I don't know why, but you are really good at this.
As we progress in our journey, the default impression of more evil-leaning groups in the game might not be as negative as it was during a prior playthrough. They still possess all of the same questionable motivations, but when playing as the Dark Urge, our bias begins to drop, and we start to see things with blood in our eyes no matter what, making areas like the Goblin camp feel much more like a natural resting place for our character, given that it clashes with the vibrant and pleasant nature of the intended one in the Emerald Grove. Back to our celebration of wiping out the Emerald Grove, afterwards we get to have quite a fun night with Minthara regardless. But upon settling down a bit, all of our pleasure from the previous interaction is rendered irrelevant if we choose to not resist our Dark Urge. Yet another body is left in our wake, being one of our least bloody ones though as a pleasant change of pace. While Act 1 feels a bit all over the place considering we kinda just do a bunch of mindless killing, Act 2 is where two clearly different story-driven roads begin to pave themselves based on whether you continue to try and resist your urges, or embrace your lineage in pursuit of receiving more and more glorious gifts which piece together the Dark Urge's history. While long resting in the Shadow-Cursed lands, our butler will— Holy shit!
For me, my lord?
You can't just do that, man! I get I'm the most bloodthirsty killer you've known, but that doesn't mean I'm immune to jump scares. He's here to explain that he wishes to grant us another powerful tithe as contribution towards reclaiming our former glory, making it clear that every dark act we're being forced to wrestle with is simply living the Dark Urge's life how we typically would, and establishing that future targets we'll set our eyes on aren't a part of a sort of contract with Sceleritus Fel, but are solely opportunities to jog our memory of who we once were. If you've journeyed through the Sword Coast once before, our next kill should be immediately recognizable as a prominent figure you may have considered as an ally once before. Daughter to Ketheric Thorm, Isabel was resurrected by the power of the god of necromancy, and now lives again in pursuit of thwarting her father's devious goals. But why is she in the sights of the Dark Urge? Because she hasn't subscribed to the channel, of course. Figuring Out Fantasy has been growing pretty fast recently, and it's all thanks to you guys. If you're enjoying, make sure to subscribe for more fantasy content and comment your thoughts on your favorite topics. Now back to the video. Should Isabel be claimed by your urge for doing absolutely nothing wrong, the veil protecting the last light in will fall, causing all those inside, devoid of the moon's protection, to fall victim to the shadow curse. Just the sort of devastation we were looking for. But if you haven't acquired a way to prevent this infectious rot, you'll surely fall yourself. It is rather easy though to acquire a near permanent source of moonlight protection early on in the shadow cursed lands. If we maneuver our way through dialogue with this fucking thing, or just outright kill him because, well, we're the Dark Urge, we'll come across a moon lantern sourcing its light from a poor little pixie inside. But if you had already run into this encounter and are still lacking solid protection from the shadow curse, it's likely because you didn't take the boisterous nature of the pixie too well, and fed into the urge to feel what it's like to crush one in your grip. Regardless, if you choose to uphold your heritage and kill Isabel, it will make things a bit harder on yourself, and it will outright kill a rather important character you've likely seen stick around in a prior playthrough. So I wouldn't blame you if you opt out of this one, understanding the gravity of what it would do to the world around you. But knowing what's ahead if you make that decision, I would definitely blame you. Should we refuse this initial exchange with Sceleritus Fel, we will get another opportunity to receive our gift. Whoever you've bonded with most within your camp will now be in the sights of our insatiable bloodlust. And it's damn hard to get through this with them still alive, showing how detrimental it can be to refuse our father's wishes. If you can't make it through the dice rolls to save your beloved though, you'll have to talk your way out of yet another killing. But this time, it's quite a bit more consequential, because the entire camp will turn against you, and you're forced to turn one casualty into far more. These decisions forced upon the player truly brings a new element to this playthrough and this one alone. While in a traditional trek through this game, you'll grow attached to your various companions and camp along the way, but there's never any volatility to the relationships. Well, maybe Lae'zel and her threats, but overall we're going to naturally drift in the direction of seeing through their personal journeys to the end, if not simply for content's sake. The complex of being a threat to these individuals spices things up as to what our united purpose is in completing this journey. This makes them seem more like just another adventurer, and it's honestly pretty refreshing that even the game's most important characters can be pushed to the brink like this. There really isn't anything stopping our bloody deeds from piling up in their eyes, culminating in them seeing the situation for what it truly is, reinforcing the thin ice we find ourselves standing on at seemingly every turn. But as we've come to happily understand, there's no killing of this magnitude without a gift from our butler to follow. And while the Deathstalker mantle was the first piece of our heritage we'd received for the gruesome killing in Act 1, this time Scalaritus Fell comes bearing no such material prize. He claims it to instead be a sign of reverence, and tells us to try on our new gym jams. Pajamas? The Deathstalker mantle was way cooler than that. Just kidding. How awesome is this? Seemingly breaking the typical bounds of abilities present within this game, maybe only being comparable to a druid at most, the Stalker form is just whoa! Prancing around and sticking out like a sore thumb, the Slayer is the ultimate embrace of this playthrough. It represents your birthright that's led you to leave a trail of blood. Armed with 5 brand new abilities and granting the player an additional health bar similar to Wild Shape or Polymorph, it feels as if our combat prowess just got a serious upgrade. The Deathstalker mantle already felt unique and created an incentive to continue pleasing our butler. But nothing compares to this as a feature reward for welcoming the uniqueness of this playthrough with open arms. It should be noted that our only opportunity to see this behemoth in another circumstance is when we encounter Orin during a playthrough using any other character. So for us to now possess this capability previously understood to only be utilized by the chosen of Bhaal, the Lord of Murder, raises some eyebrows as to who this father of ours is. To only shower this form with praise, though, would be ignoring the other half of this dark conflict we've dealt with up to this point. While difficult, there's been a side to denying the urges that seem to control this playthrough. And though there are some moments we just can't prevent, we can try our damnedest to keep our hands as blood-free as possible. This night in camp marks the moment where you can begin a redemption arc towards the salvation of this manipulative bloodlust. Denying your urge to kill Isabel will deeply disappoint our butler, and so the killing of our companion is presented as a way to make up for our diversion from Father's wishes. If you've been denying your urge this whole time, this will likely feel like a moment where your back is seriously against the wall. As mentioned, some of the hardest dice rolls are within this scenario, and while we might want to save our companion regardless of whether or not we wish to go against Father, the effect of doing so will seriously tarnish our birthright. But let's take a step away from the context surrounding our personal questline for now, and continue down some more mainstream content. More specifically, the vast amount of hidden details within Moonrise Towers, and the Mind Flayer colony. Upon arriving at Moonrise Towers and approaching Ketheric Thorm's throne room, the Chosen of Mirka will react in a way that just about shuts down any confidence we've built up to this point, as he reminds us that while in the presence of a Chosen, we obey him. It's true that while we understand ourselves to have some sort of dark bloodline granting us an exceptional killing ability, in this instance we have no authority over Ketheric Thorm, and, well, it seems pretty difficult to take him down. But he will toss us a bone in allowing us to handle the goblins as a chance to put our creativity on display. We also get a unique way to take care of these goblins, commanding them to beg, choke, and die? This playthrough is just absurd. As mentioned, there are many hidden details within Moonrise Towers to bring context to our story. We can find a cat we used to kick, or put a blood-hungry gnoll at peace by ensuring him his lord is back, but the most relevant secret we can find resides inside a crumbling wall within the castle, where we'll be forced to resist an unrelenting pull from within. But allow the entity to take control of you, and we will manifest in a blood-red void accompanied by none other than the Absolute. This encounter is in a traditional playthrough as well, but it quickly becomes clear that as the Dark Urge, the mightiest force in the entire game, knows us quite well. And honestly, that would be an understatement. They speak of us giving them everything, and then abandoning their cause. The Absolute is the biggest thing in this entire game. I can't understate that. Once the Absolute accompanies a form which can speak to us in a manner we understand, we're dropped a bombshell that not only are we deeply rooted in a bloodline possessed to kill, but also in a motive of the Grand Design. Yeah, you know, the Grand Design? The one about the prospering of the Illithid Empire through mass seromorphosis? Yeah, that one. Understanding the gravity of what this figure's influence has done to nearly all of the Sword Coast, brings some new perspective to just how important our character is, not only as a possible descendant of a bloodstained heritage, but as a participant in the overarching plot of the entire game. And beyond what revelations this brings to light concerning our place in this current story, if we have any prior experience in this game whatsoever within other playthroughs, this is extremely intriguing information that establishes a new perspective towards the Chosen 3 in the grand scheme of the plot. Our most likely outlook on these 3 Chosen is that they're in control of the Elder Brain through wielding the stones that command the crown of Karsus, suggesting that these 3 are the ones who started the chaotic events we've witnessed unfolding along our travels. But in hearing this, it makes us question what the effects of the character we're playing as had on the events of your first playthrough. Before our final battle with Ketheric Thorm, we can scavenge the Mind Flayer colony for even more revealing scenarios involving the Dark Urge, starting with an individual with quite the getup, Cressa Bonedaughter. We'll learn from her that we were her favorite pet to experiment on once we lost our memories and were stuck with an illithid tadpole. She says how we were her favorites since all the others were simply boring. We would fight back even though our mind was but a fragment of what it once was. Plus, it was supposed to be actively devoured by the illithid tadpole. We can find evidence of our thrashing at the pod we were kept in, as it shows signs of heavy resistance from when we were once in it. After some dialogue with this figure who seems to know us inside and out, literally, we're forced to take them down in combat. And the narrator's choice of words after about our fate being rooted to an attack from one wielding a dagger will soon come to a head in the inner sanctum of the Mind Flayer colony. Orin the Red is understood to be the Chosen of Bhaal, the Lord of Murder, and is accompanied by the other 2 Chosen of Bane and Merkel, Gortash and Ketheric Thorm. Upon witnessing this scene unfold, we'll likely notice the weapon wielded by Bhaal's Chosen, a dagger with an inherent aura screaming that it craves the lives of others. Now, there isn't a ton of information to back up the assumption that Orin is the culprit, but we're certainly steered in such a direction given the circumstances. If we once gave the Absolute everything, and the Absolute is really just the Elder Brain which is now under the control of the Dead 3, it feels like we should be standing where they are now. But who would we replace? The answer seems rather obvious if you've dug deep and pieced together all the clues offered so far, but we'll get a bit more straightforward of an answer at the beginning of Act 3. Upon reaching Wormrock Fortress, we'll manifest in Bhaal's temple, and Sceleritas Fell will just absolutely roast the shit out of us.
Naughty, naughty, naughty little master. You have disobeyed your father's wishes one time too many. For he who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself becomes a monster. When you gaze long into the abyss also gazes into you. Another will embrace what you have rejected, and that other will be your death. But your father loves you dearly. You may re-inherit yourself yet. Slaughter your line. Become the last of your name. Lord Bhaal shall have but one chosen.
Well, there's our answer from before, spelt right out. We should be where Orin stands, alongside Gortash and Ketheric Thorm, controlling the Elder Brain and taking over the world. This scene is extremely unsettling because there's nobody talking here but our supposed butler, yet it seems like we're being shouted at from a far mightier power. The one who's been our biggest supporter up to this point now implies that while we're his designated master, his true alliance is with our father. It's also notable that since we didn't earn the Slayer form in this instance, Orin will reach a level as she did in a typical playthrough, being favored by Bhaal and acquiring the Slayer form instead of us. And though this sequence occurs as you diverge from your bloodstained past, there's a mirrored scenario if you leaned into your murderous desires, where our butler will instead crazily praise us for all of our accomplishments as the true chosen. But no matter the circumstances surrounding these scenes, both make Sceleritas Fell out to be a bit more devious than we had initially taken him in as. But regardless of which scene we experience, much more context is out in the open about just who we are, and how ending up in our rightful place as Bhaal's chosen may not even have our best interest in mind, considering the attitude of our butler in this instance. As we exit this intense run with a place we once called home, If you hadn't pieced things together yet, our narrator gives a brief summary of Orin's fresh new relevance unique to this origin character alone. Right now, she's the current shoe-in for being the chosen of Bhaal, since we've been out of the picture for so long. But the series of killings we performed up to this point have earned us our father's favor once more, manifesting in the Slayer form bestowed to us, coupled with an ultimate mission to slay Orin and become Bhaal's true chosen, as he desires only one. On the flip side though, if we've fallen out of Bhaal's favor, we aren't entirely disowned by the Lord of Murder, but instead given one last opportunity to prove our worth. This road to redemption in our father's eyes has become even more difficult should you have avoided bloodshed. But at this point, we're likely not to exactly give a shit because we're good boys now. And in moving farther along, we can entertain a meeting with the Lord of Tyranny's chosen Gortash. It feels though like this isn't just another instance of this manipulative character trying to form a generic pact to take down Orin, but instead a reuniting of great minds who were once in a banded effort to conquer the Elder Brain. We may have been able to infer a lot so far about a prior relationship with both Ketheric and Gortash given all that we've discovered. But in this conversation, and ones we can have deeper in Baldur's Gate, it's proven that we've been much closer to the source of these events than we already understand ourselves to be. If we confirm to him that our loss of memory was not simply a tale, he will grant us a rather revealing summary of the responsibilities we once held. Gortash tells of how together we had initiated this entire plot by obtaining the crown of Karsus currently influencing the Elder Brain. And if we had run into Raphael at Shress's caress, we understand that the crown of Karsus was tucked away in his father Mephistopheles' vault after it was abused by its creator. So if we're now hearing that we were a part of obtaining that crown, it can feel extremely satisfying to know that we're the ones who got the upper hand on this Shakespeare wannabe. We can gain even further context about this event by visiting a small shop called Devil's Fee, ran by a golden dwarf named Helsic, and if we can pry or buy the information out of her, she tells us that she was the one who opened a portal for us and Gortash to raid the vault. Yet another individual who was integral to the rise of the Dark Urge so many saw long ago, but has long been forgotten in our minds. Circling back to the conversation with Gortash, and progressing through it, we see not only the cooperative nature he's known for in other playthroughs, but an encouraging and supportive attitude if we rally towards the goal of conquering Orin. This could simply be because it's in his best interest for us to take down Orin no matter what, but there's now a factor that Gortash has a comparison between his success with Orin and his favorite assassin, us. So this motivation on his end is deeper than just collecting the 3 stones in one place, but to do it alongside likely one of the few individuals he has ever called a friend. Regardless of whether or not we've traveled down the path of redemption or the path of gruesome indulgence, our path forward is clear. We must slay Orin the Red, whether our goal is to solely obtain her Netherstone or usurp her as the chosen of Bhaal. But before we can, we must prove ourselves at the murder tribunal beneath the city, as the doors to our father's temple won't open without the amulet of Bhaal in our possession. But there is a way around this unique to the Dark Urge I'll mention later. To obtain this amulet, we must complete the Investigate the Murders quest. Wow, who would have guessed? More murder. Well, this quest is mandatory within a traditional playthrough too, but how you'll treat it concerning whether or not you'll fulfill the murders on the list we've discovered is likely relative to how you've treated prior decisions of this nature concerning one option gets quite a bit of blood on your hands. But here, our choice in this matter is much more of a highlighting part to this journey, even though there aren't any interactions unique to a Dark Urge playthrough. It genuinely just feels like a culmination of our choices up to this point. As we continue to make these monumental decisions along the way, a certain ally has been keeping a keen eye on us, and she has a deep history concerning the followers of Bhaal. During a long rest in Baldur's Gate, Jaheira will visit our bedside, with her swords drawn and looking for some answers towards our involvement with the Lord of Murder and how we can handle his most tempting calls. But though she feels like a threat in this instance, she isn't here to kill us. Not yet. She claims she has once before found another route to take with a previous Bhaal spawn, and she would dearly like to find it again. She'll accompany our night's rest for precautionary measures, but it seems to be in good faith. We're promised that as long as we face Orin as ourselves and not just another slave to our bloodline, she will have our back until the very end. But sorry, Jaheira, you're gonna have to take a back seat as we travel to the murder tribunal, as there's a certain figure that commands his throne under the city that seems to have quite a history with the Harpers. And if he identifies her or this bowling ball Minsk to be in our party upon arriving, we will be deprived of some rather intriguing conversation concerning not just our heritage, but that of fellow notorious ballists. Sarevok Anchev, like Jaheira and Minsk, is a historic member of the Baldur's Gate franchise. He was even the final boss to the original Baldur's Gate long ago, where he was actually defeated by these Harpers in an epic conflict. But our concern with him has nothing to do with our companions, and is all to do with his ties to our father. and prepare yourself, there's some weird shit concerning this guy and where he likes to lay his wood at night. Sarevok is quite the historic Bhaal spawn. Existing far before us, he had fallen from grace in his father's eyes and is now launching a new cult in honor of the Lord of Murder. So all of these monumental figures collected in one room, along with the current chosen Bhaal spawn, elevates the weight of power existing in this tribunal beyond anything we've understood it to be in a prior instance. Yet another example where playing as the Dark Urge brings brand new flavor to an already dense sequence. But in relation to the matters at hand, Sarevok is your choice of either father or grandfather, whichever the following information gives you the impression of. The judge of the murder tribunal had his firstborn Helena long ago, and in some rather revealing notes we can find around this crypt, we can learn how Sarevok planted his seed in his, quote, shape-shifting beauty? I might throw up. Anyways, yeah, so Helena, his daughter, gave birth to Orin, his daughter, and then Sarevok told Helena, his daughter, to kill Orin, his daughter, but then Orin instead killed Helena, her mother, which Sarevok is totally cool with. Dude, you need to be locked away. Ultimately, there's lots to learn here in this conversation, but much of it is context we might have already pieced together ourselves. And if we proceed with the ritual to become the unholy assassin, Sarevok will mention the task we're after altogether. He understands that we're the purest Bhaal spawn there ever was, and is seemingly quite aware of the faults present in his daughter, or granddaughter. You know, it sounds like a joke at this point, but I actually don't know what to properly label these characters in relation to this freak. But yeah, he knows that Orin is just a dumb bitch. I can't take this seriously anymore. Moving on, once we're prepared and feel like we're ready to face our destiny as either Bhaal's chosen or one who stood their ground and defied their father's overbearing influence, we can make our way through the Undercity sewers and towards the coveted Temple of Bhaal, where we'll find our favorite little butler Sceleritus Fell awaiting our arrival outside the final set of doors. This is what I meant earlier about how you can basically skip the murder tribunal section since Sceleritus will just let us in on command. But what's the fun in that? Well, upon entering this inner sanctum is where everything comes to a head. But before running straight into the center of this area right away, we can skirt along the outside of the big encounter to find an absolutely gruesome display of what was once Helena, Orin's mother, and Sarevok's... I'm not doing this again. But it's a bit disturbing that the one chomping at the bit to become Bhaal's chosen would keep a mangled display of her own mother within her bedchambers. I mean, it makes sense, it's just... Jeez, man, this game is wild sometimes. Finally approaching the very core to Bhaal's temple, though, will bring us face to face with the one who's represented everything we're supposed to become, and possibly everything we're trying desperately to deny. But even beyond that, this individual is responsible for our fall from grace. Whether or not we found a new resolve to resist the urge at this point, there is still that lurking aspect that Orin is the one who dug a dagger in our head and turned our brain to shreds.
How you screamed as my knife slit your skull. Your brain juices, sticky and sweet. The favorite of Bhaal turned meat puppet, strung up by the sinews and plucked by my hands.
Now the showdown that ensues is just epic. There's really no better way to describe it. Everything we've discovered concerning our heritage has led us to this moment. We now get to experience a clash involving two of the most dangerous figures to cross the Sword Coast in quite some time, and it doesn't disappoint. In conquering the one who instrumented our downfall once upon a time, we're faced with the most pivotal moment of our journey yet.
He comes for you!
From what it seems, our butler is not just a simple token of guidance along our travels, but possibly a manifestation of our father Bhaal in pursuit to guiding us back to the straight and narrow. If we think about it, the scene upon arriving to Worm's Fortress was a possible foreshadowing to this moment, as the way Sceleritus addressed us felt very much more like a higher power getting their point across. And in this scenario, I believe that Bhaal used our butler as a way to keep an eye on us, and make sure that his purest chosen achieved the fate he had intended. So we now have a choice. Our father offers us a strength capable of conquering the Elder Brain, a power that would supersede the need for either of the other chosen to be present with their respective Netherstones, where we would rule in Bhaal's name and utilize the devastation of the Netherbrain for our desires. But choose to reject the Lord of Murder, and he will demonstrate his stranglehold over us as a direct conception of his bloodline, and drain his essence from our very being.
Thou hast defied Bhaal, thy liege and father, and in doing so hast earned a place among champions and heroes. But alas, thy courage was in opposition to the divine cosmology that bound thee to the Lord of Murder. Thou art now faithless, godless, and doomed to wander the fugue plane for eternity. I will not permit that, though all the powers of life and death dictate that it should be so. I, too, still hold some power, and I invest a portion of it in thee, who hath challenged the gods and now liveth to tell of it. Thy fight is not over, and it is thy fight. For one who can look upon Bhaal and oppose him can survive any crisis. So rise, challenger of gods, and prepare for battle once more. Death will not claim thee whilst I endure.
When I first saw this happen, I was beyond ecstatic that my boy Withers got some relevance in some capacity. I was so disappointed by how little involvement he had in a traditional playthrough. Well, I know he's extremely relevant in the grand scheme of things, but I mean in terms of interacting with us outside of camp. This makes his boundless power blatantly apparent, as he straight up brings us, a conception of Bhaal with no relevant existence beyond our father's bloodline, back from the dead. Many of our companions will commend us for the mountainous task we overcame, most notably Jaheira, who didn't have to put down yet another one of Bhaal's pets. And speaking of Jaheira, there's some pretty intense content to experience if you actually did choose to accept your father's blessing. In claiming this prize, we'll immediately be confronted by both Jaheira and Minsc, as now their worst expectations have become a reality. Another victim of Bhaal's who could have been saved, consumed by the chaos of their bloodline. And there is no wiggle room in this encounter, as it will all end in combat with these Harpers who stand before us. But there is likely the cruelest act we can commit in this entire playthrough right here in this moment. By succeeding on a steep wisdom roll, we can utilize the powers of the Illithid Tadpole to make Minsc kill his most treasured ally. Watching Jaheira lose her breath and slowly fall to the floor will be immensely impactful for anybody who's played either of the previous two Baldur's Gates, as both of these Harpers were integral forces towards stopping Bhaal and his spawn in each of these entries. So to make Minsc do such a thing, while on a smaller scale than other acts we've committed, feels like it's rooted far more in cruelty than a for-fun killing we've seen previously in the playthrough. Regardless of our course of action and dialogue, combat is inevitable, and in defeating the Harpers, we might feel obligated to pay a prior enemies of theirs a visit. Our good old grandfather, not this again, Sarevok Anchev. In returning to the one who encouraged us to take the concluding action in killing Orin and claiming our birthright, we find that there's a bit more of a malicious nature behind his welcoming demeanor. He unveils his true nature of swiping our title from us after having dealt with the most troublesome factor in the equation, Orin. It's understood that the one who slays the current chosen of Bhaal then usurps their position as well. He's trying to Kenpachi us! But he stands no chance, obviously. And in defeating him, we can proceed in carrying out Bhaal's wishes with yet another high-profile kill under our belts. Being entirely honest, if you've shed yourself of your bloodline, the unique aspects of this Dark Urge playthrough will pretty much end here, and you'll proceed with saving Baldur's Gate as a hero like we've seen in prior playthroughs. This isn't to say that in missing out on further context that you've made the wrong decision. I think that's actually one of the greatest aspects in a game like Baldur's Gate. Especially in a playthrough like the Dark Urge, you're allowed to shape a perspective on how your character approaches the Sword Coast. In reaching the conclusion of resisting your urge, you've accomplished the ultimate challenge of releasing yourselves from the clutches of the Lord of Murder, a feat that, according to Withers, proves we can overcome any challenge in front of us. And while there are endings exclusive to seeing out our father's wishes, taking this route feels right in its own way, giving players identical, if not more satisfaction than anything in store for those who accepted their birthright. Though in proceeding with Bhaal's gift in hand, once we approach the encounter with the Netherbrain, we do have one last chance to deny the chaotic future the Lord of Murder has in store for the Sword Coast. Rejecting our father's wishes at this point, though, will prove to be detrimental to our well-being as soon as the fighting concludes and the sun shines over the bloodied battlefield of Baldur's Gate. As the moment we feel like everything is settled, we're reminded that we're still binded by our violent mind. We can choose to just end ourselves as we stand, halting any further tragedies from being written by our claws, in which we'll find our good old friend Withers in a gloomy realm of darkness, where we're labeled yet again as a hero who has overcome the struggles of our past. But this time, it's a bit of a different case, as we aren't resurrected to carry on with our journey free of this curse, but are keyed into a possible role we might play in the afterlife, since he claims that our story doesn't end here. The rest of the choices in this scenario will all lead to the same outcome, and it's rather difficult to stomach. We can choose to imprison ourselves, which will lead to being torn down by the words of Withers, who claims that the realm of men will forget us, only to leave books bare and filled with falsehoods, myths, and superstitions about our relevance. But one would be a fool to think that the chosen of the Lord of Murder would be caged so easily, which leads to the outcome of the other options available to us, becoming a primal and vile depiction of who we once were. Here, the Dark Urge stalks the camp, where our prior companions, or what's left of them, celebrate the night away 6 months after the mighty Elderbrain fell. The narrator sets the scene describing each and every instinctual growl we make, and even points out the animalistic nature of pissing ourselves. As the party comes to a close, our hunt begins, giving this acclaim for one of the worst outcomes in any game in recent time. But this option is only really achieved if you made the decision to accept your father's blessing and went back on it at the last moment. If we've played the part of embracing our heritage, we're likely to see through the wishes of the Lord of Murder as intended, where it's not in our name, but
in Bhaal's name.